All right. The Urbana City Council meeting will now come to order. The time is 6:41, and today again is Monday, November 10th, 2025. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Wu.
Here.
Councilmember Evans. Councilmember Hersey.
Here.
Councilmember Colasetti.
Here.
Councilmember Bishop. Councilmember Wilkin.
Here.
Councilmember Quisenberry. Mayor Williams.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, let the record reflect quorum is present. Thank you, clerk. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the October 20th, 2025 Committee of the Whole meeting. Are there any corrections to the minutes? None? All right. We're good?
I'll move approval of those minutes.
All right.
I'll second.
Moved by Jaya, seconded by Mary Alice. Those minutes stand approved. I'm sorry. Do I need to? I am so sorry.
You were
Please
okay.
call the roll. Well, voice vote. I'm sorry with that one. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, the ayes have it. That motion passes. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. Are there any additions or changes this evening from the City Council in regards to the agenda? All right. Seeing none, the agenda stands as presented. We will now move to presentations and public input at this time. Are there any presentations that will be made? None. All right. We will now move to members of the public. You are invited to address the council. Please state your name and city of residence. For the record, each member of the community will have 5 minutes to speak. Is there any members of the public that'd like to speak at this time? No?
We do have an email.
Yeah. You want to read it? Oh, I've had enough.
Yeah, I can read if you've had enough reading after the
Appreciate you, Grace.
previous meeting. Please read my comments into the record at the November 10th regular City Council meeting. Dear City Council and Mayor Williams, I am writing with deep concern over the recent UPD use of a drone at the No Kings rally in apparent violation of state law. Cervantes' presentation at last week's Committee of the Whole meeting stated that a drone was deployed using Exemption 15.3 of the Freedom from Drone Surveillance Act. This specific exemption allows for the use of a drone, quote, if a law enforcement agency possesses reasonable suspicion that under the particular circumstances, swift action is needed to prevent imminent harm to life, end quote. Although this act does not specifically define imminent harm, the Illinois Safety Act defines it by stating an imminent harm is not merely a fear of future harm, no matter how great the fear and no matter how great the likelihood of the harm, but is one that, from appearances, must be instantly confronted and addressed. During this presentation, Cervantes describes the deployment of the drone by stating, when we deployed the drone, which was about at Race Street, because we knew they were continuing west, we gave the order for the crowd to get off of the roadway, to get out of the roadway. That was not permitted. That was not a permitted route. It was unlawful at that point. We told them to get back on the sidewalk. He also states that the drone was deployed after the route deviation and traffic obstruction at a main intersection. In explaining the rationale of believing there was an imminent threat to life, Cervantes states, and I say imminent harm because it was directly en route of the hospital corridor, and that was one of the things that we discussed. Luckily, we had touched base with the people about a week before, so Carl Security and ER director were made aware of the march happening. So when the route did go that way, what our main concern was that main entrance off Collier and University is how ambulances get people into the ER. We wanted to make sure that wasn't going to be blocked, or if it did, we could reroute traffic if we needed to. So having that drone in the air gave us the ability to see what was going on and monitor traffic, and then see anywhere else that we had to block off traffic to make sure cars weren't going around, and wanted to make sure that everybody was safe. End quote on that. It's hard to believe that this vague possibility that this small group of protesters who were engaging in a First Amendment protected activity and who might continue in a particular direction for multiple blocks towards the vicinity of a hospital would meet the definition of imminent threat to life requiring swift action. The Freedom from Drone Surveillance Act is incredibly clear in its language that protests and marches cannot be surveilled by drones. This is clarified explicitly at several points within the Act. The Illinois OAG further defines some examples of First Amendment assemblies at which law enforcement may not use drones to gather information on individuals. A permitted rally at a public forum, such as City Plaza, an unpermitted sidewalk protest targeting a government facility, a protest march along public streets, whether permitted or unpermitted, and an unpermitted demonstration by protesters at a routed or special event. Without a doubt, the No Kings rally and subsequent march on Vine and University were protected First Amendment activities that were explicitly protected from drone surveillance in the Act. If UPD had been discussing for about a week the possibility that protesters might march in the direction of the hospital, there's absolutely no reason that available officers shouldn't have been prepared to head that direction, if needed, to direct the flow of traffic and ensure safety. In fact, photographs of the protesters near the main hospital entrance show 3 UPD squad cars blocking both westbound lanes and the center lane of University, with protesters standing on the adjacent sidewalk. UPD's physical presence at this location undermines the claim that aerial surveillance was necessary to have the ability to see what was going on and monitor traffic, and then see anywhere else that would be blocked off by traffic to make sure cars weren't going around, as Cervantes stated. Even if this did meet the definition of a situation requiring swift action to prevent imminent harm, at a later slide in the presentation titled Policy Compliance, one of the bullet points listed Freedom from Drone Surveillance Act 15.3 and 22. It is important to note that Section 20-2 of the Act discusses video retention requirements when a drone has been used at a routed event or special event. As stated before, the Act is very clear in its language that these events are absolutely different from First Amendment protected activities and have separate requirements for drone usage. If the city believed that the No Kings rally was not a First Amendment protected activity and was instead a special event, one of the requirements for opening or for operating a drone at the special event or routed event is that notice of the drone must be posted at the event location, including at major entry points for at least 24 hours before the event. Additionally, the notice, we can enter the rest into the record. That was Sarah Roper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Grace. All right, are there any other letters? All right, next we will hear council input and communication. Are there any members of the council who wish to speak? No one? All right, we will move on. Are there any reports from standing committee? All right, seeing we will now proceed to Committee of the Whole, chaired by Councilmember Jaya Colasetti of Ward 4. The floor is yours.
Thank you. We don't have any items on the consent agenda from last week, so we will move on to the regular agenda items. The first I'd like to move on behalf of the committee is ordinance number 2025-11-028, an ordinance amending the Urbana zoning ordinance, amend table 6-3 to establish lower maximum building heights in the CMU campus mixed-use zoning district in specific areas, playing case number 2509-T-25.
I'll second.
All right, motion made by Jaya, seconded by Mary Alice. Is there any discussion? Mary Alice?
Yeah, I just wanted to call attention for the public and thank the staff that the height has been updated in the development regulations so that it is bounded now by University as the northern boundary. And before it had not been, there wasn't a northern boundary, and so that has been added into the zoning ordinance.
All right, any additional discussion? Grace?
And just clarify, that was all the things that we talked about last week, just saying they all got updated in there. Okay, thank you.
All right, seeing no further discussion, clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Wu,
Yes.
Councilmember Hersey,
Yes.
Councilmember Colasetti,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkin.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Next, on behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I'd like to move ordinance number 2024-11-029, an ordinance to approve the preliminary plan unit development at 704 East Windsor Road, plan case number 2510 PUD 25.
I'll second that.
All right, motion made by Jaya, seconded by Mary Alice. Is there any further discussion? Mary Alice?
I think we had talked about, I'm just looking here about the specific development regulations that we just approved in the previous one. So the previous one had the development regulations for 120 feet south of University, north of Green, and 65. This one actually is incorrect and says it includes the 40 on the west side, sorry, the east side of Lincoln. So they aren't in alignment. Unless I'm misunderstanding something. I'm at the right place?
We're looking at the one on Windsor right now. I think you might be thinking of
I'm looking at the wrong
C.
one. Sorry. Okay. This is the problem, not having paper sometimes. Sorry about that.
All right. Seeing no further discussion, clerk, will you call the roll?
Councilmember Wu,
Yes.
Councilmember Hersey,
Yes.
Councilmember Colacetti,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next, on behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I'd like to recommend approval for ordinance number 2025-11-030, an ordinance amending the Urbana zoning map, rezone 905 West Oregon Street from R6 to CMU, and 907 and 909 West Oregon Street from R5 to CMU, plan case number 2511M25.
All right, motion made by Jaya. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Sharice. Is there any discussion?
So
Grace?
is this the one that has the misalignment with the development regulations? I'm just having difficulty finding it in the, this is the one that has the,
If I may.
Yes.
I see where that chart has not been updated. It's page 83 of our packets, or page 4 of this particular item, where it has maximum height of principal structure 120, 65, and then 40 is still listed. And there's C note 19, I believe. Note 19 and the 40 piece are now no longer relevant because they were struck out of the item number 1.
so can I offer, can I offer an amendment that it's reflected in the previous one that we just approved? That okay, I'm going to make an official amendment. I move an amendment that the development regulations as listed in the rezoning is reflected in ordinance number 2025-11-028, which is the one that we just approved. So we basically duplicate that table here. Does that make sense? All right, that's my amendment. Anybody second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
All right, so the amendment that was requested, do I need to say that all again? All right, can you repeat it all? I didn't.
So my amendment requested that the development regulations table in this particular ordinance is updated to reflect ordinance number 2025-11-028, which we just updated the lower maximum building height in CMU. So I just want to be able to take what we just approved and replace this table for this one.
All right, so that motion for the amendment has been made by Mary Alice, seconded by Grace. Is there any discussion around the amendment? Sharice?
I'm just trying to understand, because, of course, I'm having a hard time even finding my packet for tonight. I'm trying to understand what it is exactly that you're amending again.
So in the previous ordinance, I'm sorry, may I speak, Mayor?
Yes, Mary Alice, thank you.
In the previous amendment, we had removed the 40-foot height from the east side of Lincoln, and also made a northern boundary for University. So this does not cover anything north of University. So if we approve the amendment, that it takes that language and puts it here.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Wu,
Yes.
Councilmember Hersey,
Yes.
Councilmember Colacetti,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkin.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Now we're back to the original motion
Yes, ma'am.
as amended.
All right, so we need to now have another roll call back to the regular motion, which was made by Jaya, seconded by Sharice. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Wu,
Yes.
Councilmember Hersey,
Yes.
Councilmember Colacetti,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next, on behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I'd like to move resolution number 2025-11-088R, a resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement for a housing needs study by the Champaign County Regional Plan Commission for approval.
Motion made by Jaya, is there a second?
I'll second.
Check it by Grace. Is there any discussion? All right, Mary Ellen.
So we did receive some public input that wasn't asked to be read in from Esther Pat requesting some additions to the housing study, specifically talking about distinguishing between homeowner vacancy and rental housing vacancy in different areas broken down by census tract. I was wondering if there had been any discussion at the city level about incorporating some of this into the plan?
We can bring the request to RPC to see if they will support it to be added to the scope. We can provide that information to them. And I believe that Esther pointed out, as far as just in general, the Imagine Urbana plan where she brought the request from, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I'm wondering if we should maybe put this on hold until we have a better understanding from RPC what they would be able to do?
Yes, we can.
I guess this is discussion time, so that's what I would ask of the people who moved it, if we could keep this in council so that we can get an update from RPC to see if they would be willing to add this.
Now, as we go into discussion, I do want to let you all know Olivia just came in behind that can provide more information. And then the only other thing was just the amount that was listed in the email for the agreement. Yeah, that was different. So our scope is within the 50,000 for the agreement with RPC, excuse me.
Oh, Olivia, did you want to speak?
Yeah,
Go
was the
for it.
question about just differentiating between rental types or home ownership types?
It was a little broader than that. It broke it down by census tract and distinguishing between homeowner vacancy rates and rental housing vacancy rates. In addition, some information about duplexes who are owner occupied and not owner occupied.
Yeah, I believe that's fully within scope, and also we're going to take a look that's even more fine-grained than at the census tract level.
So that is in the scope? Because I didn't see that when I was reading through the...
The intent is to capture submarket data at its most sort of fine-grained level as reasonably possible. So that could even be below the census or smaller than the census tract level, and would capture nuance in homeownership type, rental type, whether it's like a shadow market activity, whether that's, it's if there are multiple people living there, just really capturing the full nature and scope of existing conditions here within the city of Urbana.
So it sounds to me like from your perspective, this is already included. Is that correct?
That would be my perspective, yes.
All right. I guess whenever I'm signing off on something like this, I like to be as clear and transparent as possible. So I guess what I would say is I would just like to add then to have some of that language incorporated into it. If we're not actually asking them to do something beyond what is intended by staff. So that would be my ask. I don't know if other council members agree, but.
Grace?
I appreciate the questions, because for Olivia, we're talking specifically about questions that came in from the public from Esther Pat. We had a list of things to, requested to be included there. I am fine passing it for now as is. I think that what's on the table, the proposed timeline, this looks like this will be, a process over 7 months and over 800 hours of staff time from RPC. And I think that we have the big picture buckets there already. That just might be a little more fine detailed than would be in the proposal. Like the data collection is compile existing public data sets on housing, employment, demographics, determine gaps in data, meet with staff to prioritize filling data gaps. So I think that a lot of that is kind of embedded in there, and I definitely agree with taking those specific questions and requests and seeing if all of them are in there at that detailed level, and if not, if they can be. But I think that from what I'm seeing, I'm okay with it for now, because I think that the bigger picture already includes that, and that's maybe a little more fine details that I do hope that we can include, but also some of this being gaps in data. So I'm also prepared to hear the honest truth of what do we have as available information and what don't we, and I think that those things would be discovered along the way.
Any other discussion? All right.
So I think you can tell me if I'm incorrect, but I can ask it to be held into city council without a vote.
I'm actually not sure. I will be honest with you. So I know only one council member is required to ask that an item be pulled from the consent agenda.
Right.
But in terms of keeping something in council, I think historically what we have done more often has been we've forwarded it to a meeting certain with a motion and a vote. And I admit I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
Sharice?
I guess my question, which is usually this, is there a deadline that we we have to vote on this to make this contract work?
We were hoping to kick off this research in the month of November, so there's no actual deadline beyond the longer that it's held in council,
Except the
pushes
information being, we won't get that information. It'll take us longer.
That's correct.
Okay.
In terms of the funding is secured. It's just a matter of when we can get started, and we obviously are also trying to be mindful of RPC's staffing, and they've allocated resources in this the timeline that's illustrated in the scope.
Well, I'm also thinking about the fact that even getting this started in November, the holiday season starts up. Things tend to slow down office-wise. Things tend, because people take off. We're dealing with even a bigger problem on a federal level regarding if we'll even be able to get this information on some level, if they will be able to get this information, how quickly that'll happen based on the fact that the government's been shut down for over a month. And that's who has this information if you want to get down to the nitty-gritty of it. So I guess what I want to understand, I don't see anything wrong with putting this off for a couple of meetings, mainly because we don't even know if they'll be able to get the resources to get the information that we're asking for, let alone more detailed information.
Jaya?
Yeah, thank you. Olivia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, Sharice, I think that's a good point, but I think that we're able to pull this from county data. Much of what is being requested, I think, is what I heard last meeting, is that some of this in terms of inventory?
There is probably county data that's available. I don't want to
I might be thinking of something else.
mischaracterize, but the census data will be available. That's been published for the 10-year census, and then there's also the ACS 5-year estimates that have already been published. So I think another important thing to note is RPC has their own data resources that they've compiled and can utilize, which would capture data on a unit of measurement that's smaller than a census tract, and that's currently available. So I think there would be certainly enough to get started. One thing to be mindful of is we do want to start the public input section of the scope when the students are back for their second semester. So that would be kicked off in January. So I think if we're just mindful of that as potentially a deadline, I think we could, that would be one of the sources of data that would be required for this with that public input.
Jan?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. So I will say that I lean more towards kind of what Grace was describing, as I feel like that's captured and the way I read it. Mary Alice, I hear your point of like, let's say it if we mean it. I don't have a problem pushing this off as long as we still get it done, but I do want to flag that our next city council meeting is the week of Thanksgiving, and we're having trouble getting quorum as it is. So just to think about the timeline, if it feels realistic that we will be able to move this forward, that's our only additional opportunity in November. So I'm personally comfortable with the level of information that's written. I certainly would want to make sure all of those questions got to RPC, but my reading is that it would be included, but I understand if folks have a different perspective.
I also, sorry, I just want to add one more piece. I apologize for joining this conversation late. The costs outlined in the proposed scope are valid through December 31st, 2025. So there actually is a near-term deadline that I should have reported earlier. Thank you.
Darcy?
I was able to briefly check on the council rules and procedures, and a motion to defer, which was asked about earlier, does require a motion and a second and a majority vote to send it to a future meeting.
So has that motion to defer been made?
Can I make it over? Is it a privilege motion?
You could make a motion to defer, but it will require a second and a majority vote.
Okay. Well, I'm going to make a motion to defer this vote until the next city council meeting, which I believe is on November 24th.
All right, motion to defer to the next city council meeting made by Mary Alice. Is there a second? All right. That motion fails. I'm sorry. All right, now we are back to the original motion. If there's no further discussion, clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Wu?
No.
Councilmember Hersey?
Yes.
Councilmember Colasetti?
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkin?
Yes.
Councilmember Quisenberry?
Yes.
Thank you.
Could I ask a point of procedure where we need a vote for defer? I was reading on page 19, a motion to defer and a second, and that subsequent ones require a majority vote.
So I am currently looking at, and again, this is why we need to clean this up, which we will come back to you guys with an updated version of council rules. But I was looking at the 93-page city council procedures and orientation from 2020, which...
Page 19 was what I was looking at the bottom.
Yep, that's what I was looking at too.
Because I only see to defer, it just takes the request of two or more alderpersons through making a motion to defer and a second of that motion, period. And then any subsequent deferral on the matter requires a 3/4 vote.
It's implied that you vote on motions. We can't just make a motion without voting, and 3/4 implies a super majority rather than just like a simple majority. So if we were to, at the November 24th if that motion had not failed and it was deferred to the November 24th meeting, a subsequent motion to defer would require a greater number of affirmative votes.
So implied simple majority there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could add to the notes to clarify for our future things.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. So finally, on behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I'd like to move approval of resolution number 2025-11-089R, a resolution approving an increase in the number of liquor licenses in the Class A designation for 25 O'Clock Brewing Company, LLC, 208 West Grigg Street, Suite 101, Urbana, Illinois.
All right, motion made by Jay, seconded by Mary Alice. Any discussion? Seeing none, clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Wu?
Yes.
Councilmember Hersey?
Yes.
Councilmember Colasetti?
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkin?
Yes.
Councilmember Quisenberry?
Yes.
Thank you.
It is not on. Are there any reports from special committees this evening? All right, we will move on. Are there any reports from city officers? Seeing none. All right. The next item is a discussion on police surveillance technology, ordinance number 2024-12-042. The item is for discussion only, so council members, you all have the floor. Grace.
Thank you. I have some updates that I'd be happy to share, just comparing some of the definitions of Urbana versus other places that I did just very recently email out to council and leadership, but would be happy to put that on the screen and just review for some of your future brain food, and we can definitely continue the conversation. Did want to just open it up to our city attorney with the exigent circumstances definition, because that might be a more relatively simple one to talk about your two alternatives and then get into some of the others next.
Thank you, Grace. Welcome, Matt.
All right, let me. Can you hear me okay? All right, pull this up. So as Grace mentioned, there's kind of been a lingering question out there related to the draft ordinance that's been on the agenda, the most current version, and it relates to the proposed definition for exigent circumstances. And the specific issue that I've been looking at, trying to resolve, is raised by the last sentence, and I'm seeing that it's pretty small on the screen. I'm going to try to zoom in here a bit, make it a little bit easier to read. And I'll read it here. Exigent circumstances for the purposes of this temporary acquisition and use shall be of the type of emergency situations as contemplated under Chapter 6 of the City Code. So then that, of course, refers us to our own code. That chapter of the City Code is the Civil Emergencies chapter. And in looking at it initially, it's outdated. It was first adopted in 1977 after the state's enactment of the Illinois Emergency Services and Disaster Act, which was the precursor to the Emergency Management Agency Act, which is the current law. And under the original ESDA Act, we'll call it, local municipalities and local governments were required to adopt their own mini ESDA agencies, essentially at the city level or the county level, and the city of Urbana did that. The structure of that is outlined in our ordinance in Chapter 6. But ultimately, this Chapter 6 sort of relies on the state law. It's a creation of the state statute, and it's not been updated since it was initially adopted in 1977. A lot of things have changed since then, including the fact that Urbana no longer has its own emergency services and disaster agency. We're part of the joint emergency management agency with the county and the city of Champaign and other local government entities. And so the definition of sort of the types of emergency situations that Chapter 6 contemplates referred to the original emergency law, the ESDA Act, and now the Emergency Management Act. The original thought we had that, well, we can just kind of update Chapter 6 alongside the discussion of the police surveillance technology ordinance. The more we looked at it and the closer we looked at it, the more evident that it was that would become a bigger lift and probably more of a distraction and a side road than we might want to undertake while we're trying to move along this draft surveillance ordinance. And so in light of the fact that it's really the statutory definition of disaster that is the type of emergency situation our Chapter 6 in our city code contemplates. It refers back to the state law, and the state law defines disaster. I will pull it up and read it for you. Disasters are an occurrence or a threat of widespread or severe damage, injury or loss of life, property resulting from any natural, technological, or human cause, including but not limited to fire, flood, earthquake, wind, storm, hazardous material spill, or other contamination requiring emergency action to avert danger or damage. Epidemic, contamination, it includes many examples of specific types of disasters. Anything that falls under this definition then would require either a gubernatorial disaster declaration or a local disaster declaration, or both potentially, in order to sort of engage the emergency management process for the mayor and or governor to exercise emergency powers. The best example, most recent example, that would be the COVID-19 epidemic, or pandemic, I should say, where we had both local and statewide disaster declarations in place, and we're operating under emergency powers for an extended period of time. Obviously, that is of a different nature than something that might be, civil unrest related, or a weather, natural disaster related type of event. And so I think the key here is that tying the definition of exigent circumstances to Chapter 6 sort of inherently ties it to the definition of disaster in the state statute. And that, from a practical standpoint, means that for an exigent circumstance to exist, or to be determined locally to exist, to allow for this exception to council approval for temporary approval for the use of surveillance technology, a state disaster declaration or a local disaster declaration would have to precede it, essentially, as a natural outgrowth of the emergency management statute and our local ordinance. And so that, I'm going to scroll down and kind of get to the practical implications, and then, what I would suggest as potential alternatives. I think there's kind of two paths that seem to be evident here. The first would be generally to stick with the original language when this ordinance was proposed, and the language that appears in a lot of the other communities' ordinances that have adopted a surveillance ordinance for exigent circumstances, which does not tie it to this disaster declaration type of standard. It sort of relies more on the discretion of the police chief and sort of them making a call in the moment as to whether or not the event necessitates the use of a technology that wasn't previously approved, kind of making a call on the go. That's one potential path. The other potential path, if it's council's intent to want to restrict the discretion piece of it and not allow quite as broad a discretion for the police chief to determine an exigent circumstance, would be in line with what I think this last sentence of the current definition was attempting to do, but in a more direct way, simply replace the language that's currently proposed with the statutory definition for a disaster, and sort of tie the two together. And if that was council's intent, to make it more mechanical, to have this follow a disaster declaration, then my recommendation would be to essentially just put the statutory language from the Emergency Management Act in the ordinance. And so I'm kind of showing you what that looks like, what we'd add and what we would redact. I think we could also keep the second sentence that currently exists, which is the use of surveillance technology in exigent circumstances shall not infringe upon an individual's right to peacefully protest or exercise other lawful and protected constitutional rights. As it stands presently, the last sentence that I'm proposing we get rid of and replace conflicts with the first sentence of the current definition, because the first sentence is sort of pointing at this flexibility and discretion that the police chief makes a good faith determination based upon the facts and circumstances at hand. It's broader, and because of that, potentially more open to being used, in ways maybe that weren't intended. But adding this last sentence that's more, that refers to the statutory definition of disaster is more prescriptive, and so those two can't really exist alongside each other, if that makes sense. So it's kind of an either-or fork in the road. I would see it from a policy standpoint, and I think, that's really what I would urge council to discuss is kind of what do we intend, what do we want to do with this exigent circumstance definition. Pros and cons, I think the implication of the latter approach of using the statutory definition, you have a clearer legal standard. I think that's unquestionable. It's the statutory definition that's laid out in a fair amount of detail. Again, eliminates concerns about an individual police chief's discretion, and would require emergency authority under the disaster declaration by a mayor or governor in order to exercise it. Could be too prescriptive for some potentially, and could be too prescriptive to be useful in more situations. The reason for that, the reason I say that is because oftentimes a disaster declaration does not happen immediately as an event is unfolding. And so kind of from a timeline standpoint, it could eliminate the use of this in certain scenarios that are more time sensitive. And then, of course, as I've described, it would make the response timing dependent on the mayor or the governor's decision making. So I'll go back to the first one and just talk through it. The more kind of open-ended, good faith and reasonable belief standard, which is the existing language in the first sentence. Again, gives them more discretion in time-sensitive emergencies, is consistent with definitions in other communities' ordinances. However, as we all know, the exercise of discretion is different between individual people. So you could get kind of different standards over time depending on who's sitting in the chair, the chief's chair. So that's really the bulk of it. At this point, I would recommend, I think we leave Chapter 6 alone and come at that separately at a different time and take a closer look at what we need to do to update it, to align it with current practices for emergency management locally. And I think we, in the interest of kind of staying focused on this, do that separate from this process and focus this discussion on the narrow definition of exigent circumstances. So with that, I'll take questions and we'll attempt to clarify as much as I can.
Grace?
Say thank you for the presentations, and I think we could possibly, is it possible, I guess the question, of doing the alternative, the second one, where we just refer to the Illinois Emergency Management Act, and but it doesn't have to actually be declared by the mayor or the governor or officially by the mayor. Like if it were exigent circumstances, kind of like the first one that's defined by the mayor in situations that meet the criteria for the Illinois Emergency Management Act. Does that make sense? Like that we could say it meets this criteria of this high bar of emergency catastrophe, even if there's not a statewide or the mayor didn't officially order something for the whole city, but that for the purposes of this ordinance, we need to meet that standard at least. Does that kind of thread it in between a bit?
Possibly, yeah. I'd want to think about it a little bit more closely, but I think that's a possibility. As I'm thinking through it, just kind of order of operation, from an order of operation standpoint, I don't see a practical reason why the exigent circumstances determination for using a particular technology would have to come after the disaster declaration, just in an operational sense. Practically speaking, those two things may align. You may have both of them, and we could try to sort of disentangle those two things in terms of having the declaration precede it. I'd want to think it through just to make sure that we're not overlooking anything, but I think that would make some sense to do as an alternative.
Thank you. Yeah, it seems like we're writing the rules in the law right now, right? If we can have the loosey-goosey definition, seems like we could have a varied definition of the state one as well. But yeah, thank you.
Mary Alice?
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit along the lines of Grace in that I was just coming from it from a different angle, which is if we went with the first one, it could be in collaboration and basically sign off from the mayor's office, right? So it's not just the police saying this is an exigent circumstance. It would also have to go through without the formal declaration of this is an emergency. I would like to, I mean, it seems reasonable to me, this kind of definition of disaster, but I'd also like to hear, like, are there things that we're not thinking about that aren't included here? That I don't know.
Jaya, did you? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had something. Okay. My bad. Anyone else? Therese.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around other than the definition that we already have for exigent circumstances, what I'm trying to wrap my head around is who decides in the event, of course, that who is it that defines and makes the decisions about what an exigent circumstance in the city is that would actually basically take the power away from the chief of police or that person to make that decision to, in good faith and reasonable belief. How do we reconcile that he does not, or that he does have, makes the decision regarding that? Who?
Are you saying under the current proposed definition, who would consult on that definition or that decision?
Who decides on that?
I mean, I think it's a good question. I think maybe something that would be wise for us to develop some kind of internal procedure for if we were to use that definition. I would just, off the top of my head, I would guess that in a circumstance like that, it's likely to be consulting with legal, I would guess. And
well,
likely
and
with the
what
mayor's
kind of
office and
circumstances, to if we're going to narrow what the state definition is, then what would be the circumstance within the city where one would define or say this is an exigent circumstance? What is that definition of exigent going to be exactly? If in fact you're going to say that it's not the police chief's good faith and reasonable belief, then whose good faith and reasonable belief is it? Who determines and who defines what an exigent circumstance actually is?
So if we're tying it particularly to the disaster definition, and if we were to, quote unquote, take that decision out of the chief's hands and make it contingent upon, the mayor making a disaster declaration, I would still think a mayor is typically going to get input from all the public safety officials who are involved, the legal counsel, and sort of a small group of people that would be considered subject matter experts in the moment when there's a determination of whether we need to declare a disaster. I think that's also a decision made in conjunction with the state emergency management officials as well, because there's a process that ties the local disasters to the state agencies' processes also.
So depending on what the action or whatever that circumstance might be, there's our our ability to avert it may actually not happen. We'll be in the disaster by the time somebody makes a decision as to what it is, and or somebody will be making a determination about whether something is a disaster or not based on what is seen, but based on what they think.
You're saying someone who isn't the police chief?
Is somebody that isn't, well, let me put it this way, somebody that is not an expert in that particular type of field or something, they'll be the ones making that decision on whether it's exigent or not, or they'll be defining what exigent actually is.
So, just trying to parse this. So I think if we take the approach that Grace inquired about, where we would sort of decouple the disaster declaration piece from just using the definition under the State Emergency Management Agency Act to say this definition of disaster is what we think an exigent circumstance for the purposes of creating a carve-out in our own ordinance for approval of surveillance technology. We think that these two things should be one and the same, essentially. In that scenario, the chief would still ultimately make a decision, does it fall under this definition, which is more detailed, gives examples of the types of events that would be considered a disaster under the state law, and also, if we did this, then an exigent circumstance under our own ordinance.
May
Grace.
I try to elaborate too? So what's currently in the proposed ordinance on the table for Urbana is that first definition that he showed of exigent circumstances with a pretty lower threshold that's determined by the chief of police and then approved by the mayor. So if you look at actually in the ordinance, section 6, just because the definition says it's determined by the chief of police, the mayor still has to approve that or their designee to initiate the steps of an exigent circumstance. So even though our definition said the chief of police determines it, they still need the mayor's approval either way. And then if you look at this second alternative, using the state thing, the mayor would set that. So either way, the mayor is the one who ultimately decides if we're in an exigent circumstance in either definition or either system. It's just a matter of if you go through a chief of police first, which I think is actually not the most appropriate, especially if we're going with this disaster thing, because it could be the fire department, it could be public works. And that's, again, back to why I think that this should apply to all city departments rather than focusing on one in particular. So I think it would make sense to have the mayor decide that we've met this threshold, even if there's not an official emergency declaration out, that the mayor decides that we've met this threshold. And then we initiate the exigent circumstances from there.
Is there anyone else? Any other comments, discussion? Jaya?
Yeah, I think that's some of what I was getting hung up on is how this would work, especially if it wasn't in the police department. I think the second option with potential minor modifications gives us a little bit more clarity that it and maybe we need to say this, that it would ultimately be the responsibility of the mayor to determine if this standard had been met. So I lean more towards something more like alternative 2 so that we can make sure that we're capturing all of the potential needs in which we might need to make an exception from a guidance for any technology that we're using.
Grace?
Agreed. I would just say that the intent of in the drafting process of the proposed ordinance that we were intending to set that higher threshold. So when we were referencing Chapter 6 of the City Code, we were intending to reference this emergency disaster stuff through the state. So I will just say that that was the intent of the original drafting, was to set a more kind of emergency catastrophic standard, but also have a local mechanism so that we can determine that without having to wait on a state declared natural disaster, but that we're still determining that higher threshold for ourselves. So I think that this alternative two, as we've discussed, with maybe a little thinking and tweaking of the language so that it can be the mayor declares that in line with these requirements, and keeping that second sentence about not interfering with people's constitutional rights. And so I'm happy we can continue kicking this around, or if other people have any more decided thoughts at this time.
Mary Alice?
I was wondering if, we have been having the conversation in terms of whether or not this ordinance is going to cover the entire city or the police department. But I'm wondering if if there's been any feedback from staff in any of the departments about this kind of disaster being tied to the exigent circumstances. If I look at Oak Park, for example, it's much more narrow in that it's not all of the different disaster things, right? Serious physical injury of person, imminent danger or significant property damage poses a risk of harm to the safety of the occupants of the property of the public. All right, it's very kind of tailored towards, because generally speaking, we're definitely dealing with the climate, but we're also dealing primarily with people, right? Rather than just kind of nature and the forces. And so as I look at this, my immediate thought, even though it's not 100% true, is this is primarily for those kind of nature type of things that happen. If we have a tornado, if, we have some big flood or something, those are all natural disasters, and that's where my head goes. So I guess my question is, do we mean beyond those natural disasters, that exigent circumstances exist beyond natural disasters?
I don't know who had the hand up first, but Grace.
And as far as, are you referring to the state definition, focusing on natural disasters?
Well, I'm just looking at this definition up here.
Well, could we go to the alternative one? Is that what? Yeah, the alternative two. So the state definition does talk a lot about natural disasters, but it does say, or human caused, and it includes riot, critical shortages of essential food and fuels, hostile military, paramilitary action, or attacks of domestic terrorism. So, I think that this encompasses both natural and more significant man-made disasters. Or were you talking about the first Urbana definition?
No, I was just looking at the Illinois Emergency Management Agency Act, right? It's a disaster if it's an occurrence of threat of widespread or severe damage, injury, loss of life, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like this was primarily written for natural disasters. Now, I recognize that it has been used in other circumstances, most recently under COVID, right? But there's been a lot of pushback about, was this act originally intended for that kind of action? So I just want to be really clear that a disaster is more than natural. There are human interactions that could create a situation that is unexpected that we don't have the right tools to address. So just food for thought.
I would just say, I think, even beyond the natural disaster portion of it, those are everyday situations where something chaotic happens. I'm in communication with whoever that individual, whether it's police, fire, whatever the case may be. I'm in communication with that individual anyways. That would essentially kind of play into the same role of me being the one to make that decision anyhow. I don't know if that's kind of, I think, what Jaya was saying, but Jaya, go ahead and speak for yourself. I'm sorry.
Yeah, although I'm going to make a point that's going to sound funny following that, sure, which is that I'm going to encourage us to think about this not in terms of people who are currently in roles, right? So thinking about that we're drafting something that I was planning on saying this already, just so you know, for when we have a future mayor, when we have a future chief of police, when we have different leadership in any of our departments, right? So that as we get into the meat of this, then we're looking at creating specific policies for how technology that we have said falls under this ordinance, draft ordinance, once it's finalized, would fall under it, that we're thinking about, okay, when are the times that we can't wait to go through the normal steps of council approval, right? And I will say for myself, at least if we've determined that something is surveillance technology, I don't feel comfortable just saying, okay, department head, you've decided this is an emergency, go for it. So that's what I think is important that we're clarifying in this piece. And I think, the language from the state law does give us, a general sense of, yes, a lot of it is about natural disasters, but I think it does, for me at least, capture the areas that I think we might want to make an exception, where we would be delegating that authority to make a short-term decision to the appropriate department head and the mayor. So I think that's, kind of those two pieces of like, it's very easy to think about this in terms of who's here now, but I think we need to think about like, what are the long-term implications? Because we're drafting something that's not meant for just now. That's supposed to be a tool for the future too.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Great.
Are you okay if I go up?
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you all. Just wanted to share an additional resource. Well, actually, maybe I'll start with this one. This is one that we've already seen in some of our previous discussions. I resent it, I think, with just some minor corrections. So this was Oak Park versus Illinois, and we compared the kind of main meat of the ordinance in the middle of September in a productive discussion. And then I've later sent out the specific definitions. There was one correction. I had just copied the wrong section, so the annual reports weren't aligned. So they weren't very aligned because it was comparing like the use report versus the annual report. So anyway, that's that. I've kind of gone through and started putting things in red that are included in one ordinance and not the other, that we might want to consider adding from Oak Park or evaluating if we want to keep it in ours. And then so that was about that. I started putting some things in random colors. So,
I was just going to say, what's purple?
I had this started turn into some of my own like notes that I was like, oh gosh, I shared this one. I think purple is ones that are, very similar, but like worded a little differently. So like all those purple sections are kind of talking about the same thing. But then getting down to the specific definitions, this is hopefully helpful and again has been emailed out. I'm down to keep it a lighter conversation today, but just wanted to highlight and share this resource. So looking at the specific examples that were covered or included in the surveillance technology, I have the column with Urbana, things that were listed in ours, and then compared to Oak Park, Illinois, Boston, Massachusetts, Oakland, California, and Dayton, Ohio, and have gone through their specific examples as well that they say are specifically listed as examples of surveillance technology, and they all say not an exhaustive list, so not necessarily everything, but these are some examples. And then I've ordered them in, like the top are things that are included in all 4 other ordinances, like license plate readers, stingrays, biometric data, gun-tot detection system was actually in all the other 4, thermal imaging. You can go through and read some of the others. So I put at the top the ones that are in all the other 4 ordinances that seem, in line, which makes sense because, again, this was drafted in line with other examples that cities are using, so that makes sense. And then towards the bottom are things that are only included in the Boston ordinance and not others. And so we could see if those are still important for us or if they fall into other kinds of things, like mobile DNA capture technology probably falls under the biometric data as another example already. So we might just have more specific things that we may or may not want to keep. And then Oakland, California also has body-worn cameras specifically listed, but ours in Oak Park do not, especially because we have Illinois law that supersedes that. And then other things to consider I put in yellow here is about drones, especially with that Illinois Freedom from Drone Surveillance Act. And I hope that we can have a follow-up on some of the questions on how the use was proper for the No Kings protest and other ways that we're using campus drones in Urbana and how that works with the Illinois Act. So I think that that would be something worth including here, even if it's just to say that drones are covered under the Freedom of Drone Surveillance Act, or maybe we do want some more specific reporting than is required by the state. There's also the Freedom from Location Surveillance Act and Protecting Household Privacy Act that I've sent in some email chains to everyone. The first email chain had like some notes. The second one had the example ordinances, and then a third one in that chain had these acts, if you would like to read through those more. So I bombarded you with a bunch of information, but I also wanted to give you a sneak peek so you can have some context what we're looking at. So again, those are things that were specifically included or not in these 4 other ordinances, and things that we may want to consider based on other state statutes. And then I also have the general definition here. I added Dayton, Ohio after I did this, so I didn't add them yet. But I have Urbana, Oak Park, Boston, and Oakland. They all have pretty similar definitions in general of things that can, retain, process, keep, whatever personally identifiable information. That's all similar kinds of definitions there. And then I also put kind of back to the other question of what it applies to. And so Oak Park applies to the police department only. Boston is all city departments, and the mayor submits the request for approval to city council. And Oakland is all city staff. And the way it's worded, it makes it seem like the staff go directly. It's like any city staff wanting to use surveillance gets approval from council versus staff going through the mayor versus the police department directly doing the request. And then these are similarly things that are specific examples that are not covered in the ordinance as surveillance technology. And again, ordered with things up at the top that have the most agreement with other city ordinances. Things like routine office hardware were included in all 4. Manually operated cameras for digital recording and things, probably like when we're recording our closed session meetings or things for notes, that's not included here. Things that cannot be transmitted remotely, like binoculars and night vision goggles, are not included in a lot of these examples. And other manually operated things that are explicitly for city purposes, like city security cameras on the property or for internal things. And then as we go down, some that have less and less similarities to some of the others. And I think these really depend on what the city has set up. Like some have parking in their databases or employee key fobs. I think it just depends if your city has key fobs for the employee. Does your parking data have everyone's license plate and name in their record? So I think that it just depends on kind of what aspects the city is dealing with that they may want to consider as either part of that or not. And then again, body-worn cameras is only us and Oak Park, but that makes sense because it's an Illinois statute. And then there were some that I put down at the bottom here, that were included in the other ordinances, but not in ours. Some of the ones I thought were interesting was they talked about the police dispatch system. They have CAD, I think similar to like our MetCAD, right? And I think that would be an interesting thing to consider, how we may want to have that explicitly as an example or not. Some of them also explicitly exempted interview rooms for police departments. I think that's another interesting one. Some had also holding cells and internal video systems, and then some others just had in the interview room. One had smart meter technology for water sewer utility purposes. I'm guessing the city deals with their water utility, and we do not as a municipality, so that's another example where it just depends on what the city is dealing with that they may want to include. And then another one also had personal communication devices that have facial recognition only for the purpose of user authentication. And I'm guessing like if your city device has a facial recognition to access it, that would be exempt if it's only for employee entry purposes. So those were some other ones that we may want to consider adding that we did not have. So just wanted to present that. Happy to take any questions or thoughts, and also just let people mull over a bunch of information that was thrown at you.
Thank you for the work on that, Grace. Are there any questions? Mary Alice.
This is really helpful. I appreciate you putting it in a spreadsheet. I do have an ask, though, because we're getting lots of documents, and sometimes it's easier for me to see things on paper. And so if you are going to do any of these types of documents in the future, and I'll certainly ask the clerk if maybe we could ask the clerk to print them for our discussion. That way we can have them in front of us. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Darcy?
In that same vein, very briefly, I understand you emailed these today. We can touch base afterwards, but is there an interest from the council that this be included in future discussion items for this? Previously, we have not included like the entire list of version history. We've tried to keep it as updated as possible, but since this is like a lot of reference material, I guess direction to staff on how they would like to receive this, we got a request for print, but do you want it in the packets? Do you want it in minutes?
I think we can for future ones, if I may. For this discussion, I did ask that we not really have things in the packet because we've had a bunch of older versions, and sometimes there's like an old memo and a version and another version and then another attachment, and it's like almost overwhelming with old stuff that's not as relevant. So especially since this was a discussion, and I also was putting this together like on my lunch break today, so I didn't have it ahead of time. So I didn't have it there, but I do agree that we can have stuff in the packet. But I also just want to be sure that it's streamlined and like the most recent up-to-date version, and not getting behind on them. So I agree. I think for our next discussion or next move on this can definitely include this more ahead of time and have it printed out.
Thank you. All right. Great. Jaya.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Grace, as always, for pulling all this together. I guess I'm curious from the council in general is what's it going to take to get this done? We've been working on this for almost a year. I know there's a lot of information to process and digest, and it's been presented in different ways to try to make that easier. But I guess it would be helpful to me to know, I know Grace has carried a lot of this, Matt's done a bunch as well, just to figure out like what is still needed to actually put this in place and move things forward.
Anyone? Comments? James?
So I can recall saying maybe about 6 weeks ago that I thought this could be done by the end of November. At that time, what felt like to me, what the sticking point was having most of council in the same room at the same time, and that still has not materialized. So, we either have to accept that it's going to be passed by a smaller amount of council, or I think that's, I don't think there's been a delay on moving forward other than the ones that have been asked because people couldn't be here at this point. That's my impression. So.
Mary Alice.
Jay, I think it's an excellent question because poor Grace comes back every time with more information for us, and at some point you have to say, okay, let's pause and let's recalibrate and figure out what do we are all on board with, and so one of the things that I struggle with a little bit is I have some ideas of things I'd like to see change, and I'm sure other people do too, or have like feel strongly about one part or the other part. We have what Grace's last proposal was. It was done before some of these comparison ones. But I don't know a good thing other than I would like to, I think at the end of the day, and I did ask Grace this, if she would be open to different things, and she said that would have to be an amendment. So I feel like maybe if people feel like they have enough information, maybe we put something to the staff. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, the answer to the question is for everyone behind these desks to understand that not everyone's going to be happy with everything, and finding and understanding that there is a middle ground. Again, we got to give some to get some, to get something moving. Understanding that as time goes on, future, comes down the line, we can make changes. We can add to, we can take away. But if we're going to get something across the finish line, we all have to be on the same page and knowing that we may not, everything that we thought of may not be in there. Even some of the things that you thought of will be there that you didn't necessarily want. That just needs to be the understanding. I think that we have enough, and I've said this before, and I appreciate the work that, Grace and everyone here has put in well before my time. Just we have enough, I feel like, to move something forward. It's just a matter of us just buckling down and just getting it done. So, Darius?
Just to add, a lot of the earlier processes since I've joined was making sure that we fine-tune definitions. So I think that was a part that Grace brought and was looking for additional feedback on, are we clear on these definitions? And then from there, more has been added into comparison. So for us, for me to bring it to staff, I've kind of been waiting for kind of a midpoint to once you all feel comfortable, have a clear draft, because we have some comparisons in the draft. We have some sections that are still being asked to clarify. So I think that we kind of skipped over the definition part and started going more into some of the details, which has been okay as long as it's been a working, it's being worked through by you all. But just as Mary Alice did add, at some point we do want this to go back to staff to provide you all with feedback. As we're developing this, we do have to remember that the staff will have to live by this in a sense. So we do want to give you that feedback as to what works and what we would love for you all to take in consideration as this moves forward. So.
I'll go Jay and then Sharice.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, I think obviously we want as many voices, as many participants as possible. And again, the action, the speed with which things are happening has been exponentially faster over the last, since the election. And I'm very grateful for that. Again, we've been talking about this for a long time. We could talk it to death. And so I'd like to make a suggestion for people to consider, which would be to have printed copies of the current proposal and these additional documents for our next meeting. If there are amendments that need to be considered, if those could be sent out and printed out in advance as well. That way we all have all the materials that we can sit down, right, for folks who do want to be able to compare side to side. Because, I think that's a very reasonable request to say, let's let city staff look at this so we can understand. But I think even if we can have some of that happening simultaneously of is there anything that just seems totally not feasible in the current draft? That information from city staff would be really helpful. And then if we could just sit down and figure out what are the sticking points, what might folks want to amend, I think it might help us get this through.
Sharice?
I guess what I want to add to this is that I know some of the definitions of what you called surveillance and stuff like that, and not in my understanding too is that the last time we were talking about certain softwares and so on and so forth that folks would have to get permission to use. And I, when you say city staff, Darius, do you mean everybody that works here in different departments, or do you just mean like you and the mayor, the city administrator, executive administrator, so on and so forth, finance director, heads of departments, so to speak?
Yep, there you go. Heads of departments. We'll make sure that all departments have an opportunity to provide feedback. As when I provided the list of surveillance tools, it went out of the police department. So we included other departments in this portion. So I know originally this all started more directed towards the police department, but we have other departments that use tools that may come into consideration, and we wanted to take care of that in advance. So
they'll have some input about this as well.
Yes.
Okay, that's what it's like. One person's surveillance is just another person's analysis tool. So I don't. And personally, on my part, I feel that my expertise is none of this, to be honest. And I feel that it's incumbent on us as council members, well, for my part, I'll just speak to that, to not be held liable or accountable should something disastrous or catastrophic happen and we not have the tools to take care of it. And once we put ourselves in that mode of, oh, everything has to come past us in order for certain tools to be used and so on and so forth, we are making ourselves and the city liable for anything contrary, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, that could happen for the lack of us not having something, or not giving permission, or not allowing something, because I know that's not my ballywick as a council person for me to be able to say, well, you can't use this because that's been considered surveillance, when actually that person may need it to analyze, something else that is important to the city. And I'm already apologizing to some people in my constituency in my ward for not being able to make things happen because of us not having certain things. People in my ward, for some reason, think we do have ALPRs and stuff. We don't. So when there's a shooting and the car zips off, and they come to me saying, well, where are the cameras? How come that didn't happen? It's like, well, did they turn left or right? That makes a determination for it, and whether or not, and if they turn up left and they're going towards Champaign or going west or however, that may be, then we might be able to find who did that. If they turn right, sorry, not a whole lot we can do about it. And so, and I literally did have that kind of conversation with somebody just last week. So, for my part, I just want to know that we're not painting all of Urbana with the same brush, because not everybody that lives in Urbana is living in the best of circumstances sometimes. And so there may be times when some of this stuff will be needed, and then if we're putting obstacles in the way of the city to gain that, and I'm not even thinking about departments, any specific department, I'm thinking in general, then I think we open ourselves up for liability issues. So.
All right, I think Mary Ellis had her hand up first, and then Grace, I'll come to you. You're next.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a couple of things. One, Darius, I think it's really good for us to solidify what we think these definitions are. But to Jaya's point, I'm just trying to figure out, Grace, you had, I think September 15th, I think it's the last date that I got an email with the draft ordinance. It's version 6. I don't know if that is the most recent. And if it is the most recent, we've had some conversations past that where you've gone through the whereas and highlighted and so forth. Is it updated based on all of those conversations? Version 6?
The version 6 notes from September 15th has the highlighted ones. That was the document that we were on during that meeting while I was highlighting things during that meeting.
Oh, so it's not the clean one.
Correct. Yeah. It's not clean, but I would be happy to put together a...
It would be great if we could have an email with all the most recent information, so we're not all digging through our email boxes trying to figure out what's most recent.
Sure. Some of the problem is we highlighted a bunch of stuff to just think about.
Right.
That you were like, hey, that sentence reads weird, so it's just in red. But there's nothing that I have to change it. We just highlighted it as think about it, so I don't really have direction on changing it or not. So I can do a clean version where I just omit or unhighlight everything we had discussed. But a lot of those things, we didn't have any clear direction or consensus. It was just like, hey, I don't like this sentence, and that was it.
But can we have that with the highlights so we can...
That's what the 915 version should be.
Okay, maybe I need to download it because it does not show me.
And if not, I can resend it, or it's on this computer as well, and yeah. Because it says clean, because it was a clean version, but then there were notes added, so it should say that draft.
Mary Ellis, can I say what I think you're saying?
Yeah.
And Grace, correct me. I think you're asking for a brand-new, fresh one with all of the changes that were recommended, and that be our new starting point?
Well, that would be good, except for I think when we had the conversation, we didn't have 100% consensus on things that we were going to omit or add. So I think this is what Grace has put up here. So you see yours is clean with notes. That's not the one I downloaded. I just downloaded the clean one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I can send this one. So yeah,
Yeah.
the things in red were like, you were just like, I don't know, come back to the sentence. It looks weird to me. And there were some here that was just like, or consider this. So yeah, I can share this one if I haven't already.
I think if we use this as like a starting point, like this is what we're going to have the conversation about, I think that will move the needle.
Sure.
Thank you.
Jaya, I think you had your hand up. Never mind. Grace.
I did want to speak to the liability risk piece that was mentioned, and just remind us that there is arguably more liability to not have these policies in place, that there are a lot of cities that continue to be sued for having surveillance without having a policy or protections in place. There's a lot of cities that are still in litigation over having license plate readers with no policy on it. The Illinois Drone Surveillance Act requires that if we use drones, we have to have a policy on them. They are being used by other entities in Urbana. I'm not really sure how that all fits in, but just saying that for me, the bigger liability is not having these policies and approval in place is how we are opening ourselves up to potential liability. And that, again, this ordinance is just about approval and having policy for these surveillance technologies. Just because it's on the list doesn't mean we're banning it by any means. It just means that we're approving it in a formal process, and we have a policy, which I believe actually protects the city in liability.
Great, thank you. All right, Jaya?
As appropriate, can I ask that for council members who might not be able to be at the next discussion, we communicate with them and see if they would like this information shared with them? It may be that folks are not in a place to review it, but I do want to respect the point that James made, that this is a big project that a lot of people have been part of for a very long time. And it may be that folks who are not here in person aren't able to do that review, but just to make sure that at least know that we're moving closer to a final version and would love to have their input if they feel up to it.
Yeah, and me and Darius can take that responsibility for sure. Absolutely. Right. Yes. Sorry. I was saying me and Darius, we can take that responsibility to reach out. So, Darcy?
Just lastly, as a housekeeping, if it is the intention that this item comes at the next committee of the whole, and we are wanting all of the more recent stuff as well as the notes in the packet, it was mentioned as well that perhaps council members who have intentions of amendments should share those ahead of time. If you want those amendments to be included in the packet, AKA available to the public ahead of the meeting and on the website, I need them no later than Thursday at noon to make sure that they are in the packet. If you are not as concerned about them being in the packet and publicly available, email them to the city council email group and send them to the council ahead of the meeting. That's it.
All right. Grace, thank you. All right, that'll conclude the discussion around the surveillance ordinance. Thank you all for your input as well, and I think we're one step closer to getting this bad boy across the finish line, or bad girl, however, whatever. All right. Next item is mayoral appointments. The following appointments are recommended for council approval. I will do these together if that's okay. The first is Chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, Ms. Annie Adams, the term ending June 30th, 2026. And for the Civilian Police Review Board, Ms. Melissa Baber, with the term ending June 20th, 2028. May I have a motion to approve these appointments?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Motion made by Mary Alice, second by Sharice. Any discussion? Grace?
We'll just do the standard thanking these individuals for their volunteer service to the city and appreciate their work and welcome them to reach out with council in collaboration with their commissions. And then also had a question on the dates. For BPAC, is this filling a current term? I'm just wondering why it's only until June 26.
Yeah, so this is for her to become chair because Audrey resigned. She's no longer there, so she's taking over the
Like
remaining.
finishing the rest of a
Correct.
term?
Yes, she's finishing that.
Thank you.
Darcy?
I also just want to call attention to the fact that normally these are June 30th and that one is June 20th. Is that a typo or is that accurate? June 20th, 2028? It's a typo?
Correction. Melissa, Civilian Police Review Board, with the term ending June 30th, 2028.
We don't want a shorter 10 days?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did I say? I'm sorry, y'all. I'm tired. My apologies. Melissa, I do want to have you here until June 30th, so yes. All right. Motion made by Mary Alice, seconded by Sharice. Discussion has been made. If there's no further discussion, clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Wu?
Yes.
Councilmember Hersey?
Yes.
Councilmember Colasetti?
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkin?
Yes.
Councilmember Quisenberry?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, that motion passes. Miss Annie and Miss Melissa, congratulations. All right, with no further business before this body, this meeting is adjourned. Please stick around for Committee of the Whole. Grace, can we have a 5-minute break before? Are we okay to have 5 minutes? All right, go for it. Thank you.